Welcome to today's launch event for the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base. I'm Kelly Kivlin, a former curator at DIA, but I am very pleased to be joining today to introduce this event. And it is such a pleasure, really, to be in the company of these extraordinary panelists that are going to be speaking today more about not only the knowledge base, but Joan's practice at large. Our conversation also aligns with the opening of Joan's new exhibition at DIA Beacon, which is currently on view now, and it will be on view until fall of 2023. I want to also give a very warm thank you to my colleagues, Theodora Lang and Max Sinone, for their assistance with today's program, and to Heidi Giannotti, Randy Gibson, Jan Kroes, Sakina Gavigan, Jin Jung, Elizabeth Peck, Curtis Harvey, and others for their incredible dedication to realizing the current exhibition at DIA Beacon. And also to the editors, Barbara Clausen and Kristen Poor, and authors Heather Davis, Zoe Todd, Adrian Edwards, Joan Jonas, Andre Lepecki, and Janine Tang of the forthcoming DIA monograph on Joan's work. And we are also thrilled to announce the reprint of DIA's original publication on The Shape, the Scent, the Feel of Things, which will be available in the coming months. I now want to provide a short introduction to those that will be leading today's event. It is a few people, but it's really important that I speak to all of their work. Joan Jonas was born in New York and received a BA from Mount Holyoke College and an MFA in sculpture from Columbia University. Her work has been exhibited internationally with recent solo exhibitions at the Tate Modern in 2018, Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in 2019, and the Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum in Madrid in 2020, amongst many other presentations. She also represented the United States in the 2015 Venice Biennale and received the Kyoto Prize in 2018. Barbara Clausen is Associate Professor and the Vice Dean for Research and Creation, Faculty of the Arts at the University of Quebec in Montreal. She is the Curatorial Research Director of the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base. I keep wanting to say JJKB because that's what we all call it, but I will get there. Rebecca Cleman is the Executive Director of the Electronic Arts Intermix. That's an organization, of course, that is very close to DIA, based here in New York. She has programmed and curated numerous exhibitions and screenings exploring media art history, including Aesthetics of Analog at the Museum of Art and Design in New York in 2012. And with Alex Klein, she curated broadcasting EAI at ICA, which was at the ICA Philadelphia in 2018. Deena Engel teaches undergraduate computer science at New York University and undergraduate and graduate courses in digital humanities and the arts. She is the co-director of the Artists Archives Initiative at NYU, where she researches and collaborates with museums on the conservation of time-based media and software-based art. Andrea Lissoni is the artistic director of Haus der Kunst Munich. Previously, Lissoni was the senior curator of international art at Tate Modern in London and curator at the Hangar Biacacca in Milan. Lozana Rossenova is a research associate in the Open Science Lab at the German National Library of Science and Technology in Hanover. Her research focuses on data presentation and performativity in the online archive of born digital art. In 2020 to 2021, Rossenova served as assistant director for the linked data research at the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base. Glenn Wharton is professor of art history at UCLA and chair of the UCLA Getty program in the conservation of cultural heritage. In addition to co-directing the Artists Archives Initiative, in 2006, he founded Voices in Contemporary Art, or VOCA. There's a nonprofit focusing on the production, presentation, and preservation of contemporary art. I just want to give a bit of an overview of how the day will unfold. This event will include an introduction to the JJKB by members of the project team, and then will be followed by a screen of archival footage of Jonas's work, Organic Honey from '73, and then a discussion among the artists, Barbara Clausen, Rebecca Cleman, and Andrea Lissoni will take place. We are going to end the event with a Q&A session. So at any time, you're welcome to just drop your questions in the Q&A area at the bottom of the screen. Closed captioning is also available via the function at the bottom of your screen as well. So thank you again for joining us, and I'm happy to now turn it over to Rebecca Cleman.
Thank you, Kelly. I am really thrilled to be here with all of you, and also just want to join in celebrating the launch of the JJKB, which is a wonderful public resource providing profound insight into a tremendous artist. I have, I think, spent the last week looking through it and feel like I've just skirted the surface. So I'm really looking forward to many months ahead, cooking and listening to all the many interviews on the JJKB. So I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to the conversation later with Joan and Andrea. I also just wanted to mention that EAI will be hosting a week-long online exhibition of Joan's, a selection of Joan's early video work from the 1970s. You can access that exhibition via the front page of our website, which is www.eai.org. The direct link is also easy to remember. It's simply joanjonas.eai.org. And I believe that Theodora was going to share the link in the chat. So please do take a look at that exhibition. It's a wonderful opportunity to further enrich yourself in Joan's early works. And I look forward to more. And now I think I'm turning it over to wonderful Glenn Wharton.
Welcome, everyone, to the launch of the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base. This day has been a long time coming, but we're here. The Knowledge Base is a project of the Artists' Archives Initiative and is hosted by New York University's Fales Library and Special Collections. NYU is located on Lenape-Hoking, ancestral homelands of the Lenape people. We recognize the continued significance of these lands for Lenape nations past and present. We pay our respects to the ancestors as well as to past, present, and emerging Lenape leaders. We also want to recognize that New York City has the largest urban indigenous population in the United States. We believe that addressing structural indigenous exclusion and erasure is critically important, and we're committed to actively working to overcome the ongoing effects and realities of settler colonialism within the institutions where we work. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the Artists' Archives Initiative, which is an interdisciplinary research effort dedicated to creating and developing open access information resources for individual artists. We describe our research as digital humanities in that it combines humanities research on artists with technology research on database software and implementation. Our research places equal emphasis on the work produced by artists, their concerns for public experience of their work, and appropriate open source technologies to archive and make information accessible to the public. The motivation behind our technical research is the growing need for searchable digital resources built with more flexibility to support discoverability than traditional highly structured databases. This is particularly important for artists whose radical practice is created outside and alongside museum structures, and whose works are flexible and adaptive. In addition to developing models for artist-specific information resources, through symposia and publications, the Artists' Archives Initiative aims to stimulate discussion on topics related to the future of today's art, including authenticity, authorship, and artwork integrity. As academics, we're also strongly committed to pedagogy. Through grants and private donations, we hire graduate students in the arts and humanities to research archives and publications and conduct interviews with artists and those who work with them. Computer science students work with Deena Engel on our technical research and development. We're committed to sharing our research, and we hope that others will benefit from the technical information provided on our knowledge bases and extended to develop similar resources for other artists. Our first information resource was the David Wojnarowicz Knowledge Base, who was active in downtown New York in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s until he tragically died from complications related to HIV/AIDS in 1992. As many of you know, Wojnarowicz was an artist, writer, and activist. His films, performances, installations, paintings, photographs, sculptures, and work in other media often address issues of social justice, queerness, sex, poverty, and AIDS. The inspiration for our knowledge bases comes from thinking about how artwork and exhibition documentation housed in museums and archives for the purpose of conserving and re-exhibiting their collections can be made available to the public through online platforms. It's important to know that our knowledge bases are not archives. They do not contain traditional archival finding aids to guide researchers through cataloged information sources. Instead, they contain a combination of materials selected by our researchers, interviews that we conduct, and descriptive text written by our team. Although we try to be thorough in presenting information about the artists and their work, we realize that any such attempt is inevitably limited and an ongoing process. We provide links to our sources for users to verify our work and to conduct their own further investigations. The David Wojnarowicz knowledge base is built on the MediaWiki platform, which is the same open source software used by Wikipedia. MediaWiki allowed us to create a resource with many modes of enhanced searchability. This is the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base page on the Artists Archives Initiative website. I remember the nervousness when we first approached Joan about working with her to create a knowledge base about her work, and I'm so pleased that she enthusiastically agreed. And now here we are. Barbara Clausen will introduce you to the resource and describe our work over the past 4 years to produce it. We're particularly pleased with the inclusion of linked open data that further enhances searchability and data visualizations. And now I'll turn you over to Barbara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Glenn, for this great introduction. And I also want to thank, of course, Kelly, who really made it possible for and of course also Rebecca, who really made it possible for the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base to be presented in this wonderful context in conjunction with Joan's exhibition at Dia Beacon. And we've been working on this project for 4 years, and now I will share my screen to tell you a bit more. So I will speak to you about the Artists Archive Initiative, the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base, and this is our splash page. This is where you arrive in our project. Just a second, I'm just gonna do this here. So my name is Barbara Clausen. I'm the Curatorial Research Director of the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base, and I would like to present some of the academic aspects and curatorial thinking that we developed since 2017 when we started this project. So before I talk to you about the concept, the scope of our choice of artworks, the sources we used, and the methodology we developed, I would like to really emphasize the collaborative effort between the 17 research students, the 12 advisory board members, our research associate directors, specifically here Kristen Poor, and of course Lozana Rossenova, as well as the editors, the web page designers, the technology team, and of course Joan Jonas and her team at the studio. And I always say it's incredible what a collaborative effort this project has been, because I think our most smallest mailing list is with 180 people that we really worked with over these last 4 years, who kindly gave us permission to use all these materials. But a special thank you really goes to Joan for her generosity. So I will begin, hold on. Yes, I will begin by introducing you the two case studies. So the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base presents a collection of documentary materials about two seminal early works by Joan Jonas, Organic Honey and Mirage. They're complemented by 3 exhibition case studies that represent important moments in Jonas's artistic development from the early 1980s onwards until today. They really prove to be instances in which the two artwork case studies have been presented or have then become part of institutions. And they're her first American retrospective curated by David Ross in 1980 at the University Art Museum in California, Berkeley, followed by her first European retrospective in 1994, curated by Doreen Mignon at the Steadloop Museum in Amsterdam. And then most recently, as a case study, the exhibition Nighttime Tales at the Fondazione Pirelli Hunger Bicocca in Milan in 2004, curated by Andrea Lissoni, who we'll have a chance to talk with after this introduction. So the choice of the case studies, these two early works, was made in consultation with the artist. And I really want to say Joan has collaborated with our team by opening her archives and allowing us to interview her about a range of issues related to the principal artworks and exhibition case studies over a time period of 4 years. Most of the documents you can find on the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base are from the artist's personal studio archive, and they have not been cataloged or made public or have been available as a whole. And of course, remember, it's 2 artwork case studies. This is not an artist website. Like Glenn already really pointed out, this is not a project that claims to be complete. It's a work in progress that we hope continues to stay to continue to exist as a work in progress. The findings that we had were based on or complemented with materials we researched and received from the institutions that exhibit and collect Jonas's work, from museums and private collections. And here, museums, I really want to thank the Steadloop Museum in Amsterdam, MoMA, and also the Whitney Museum, because they own these 2 artworks in various versions, and they most generously shared their archive, really opening up to us and speaking to us, especially communicating with us. And I know some of our student research members are now working at these institutions, so that I think for Glenn, Deena, and I is of such a great joy for us to see that. But also we want to thank the festivals, galleries, libraries, and especially the performance photographers who captured Joan's work. Each of the case studies is connected to further artworks and exhibitions in a range of different contexts that stretch over a period of half a century. This is really 50 years, and that we try to find as much information as possible for the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base. Each case study section includes an overview and various collections of documentary materials and sources, such as notebooks, floor plans, interviews, chronologies, photographs, videos, detailed bibliographies, and of course, about a little bit over 30 interviews with the artist, but also with scholars, curators, collaborators, conservators, artists, witnesses, and others familiar with Jonas's work that accompany these 2 specific case studies. So we always have to think, what if we would do that with more artworks? How big would it then become? But before I begin, I think I also really want to tell you a bit about the perspectives and the questions that we started out with, especially in discussion also with Kristen Poor, who is the Associate Curatorial Director, with Glenn and with Deena, but also with the students, especially with the students. I also want to really mention here Alison Kalp, who is responsible for really thinking through the site structure with us. From an art historical perspective, 3 questions guided us. The first one was, how does Jonas's work find its various modes of existence within and beyond the framework of the institutional spaces it occupies? And also, secondly, how do artists' archives themselves dedicated to performance and multimedia works, such as Jonas's, contribute to and shape concepts and our ideas of authenticity and immediacy? What is an embodied archive? How does the body find itself in the archive? And how does the archive produce various bodies of work? And thirdly, how can a knowledge base retain and acknowledge various forms of existence and activations of performance and interdisciplinary work? And what does this mean from an art historical, conservation, and curatorial perspective? And what labor is involved, not only in the work, but also in thinking about the many histories of the work and the involvement in the assessment, gathering, and mediation of such knowledge? And what's the effect of an archive on the work itself afterwards? And so we've been really happy to give a lot of talks about the project and to really develop it also as a teaching tool and to really open it up as an open process for other educators to use it, for artists to look at it, and really always tracking what we do. And so I'm going to present you now some of the project goals. You will see the slide structure again when Deena presents the technological aspects of this project. And this is important because we work very closely listening in on each other on numerous occasions. So the first part, what am I saying, numerous occasions, 4 years long, basically. So narrative structure. One of the main goals was to build a narrative structure. What kind of structure would that be to capture our research? From a conceptual perspective, 2 factors were important for that. It was documenting and interlinking the contingent and iterative quality of Jonas's multimedia practice, and secondly, to really trace the rich historiography and reception of the work. So there's an inside and an outside work, that view that was always in our minds. Both objectives are dedicated to sharing knowledge and to serve as a tool for future researchers, conservators, and curators, and the public. Anyone. There's no need to sign up or to ask. You can just always have access, making artists' archives and their exhibition histories available to the public. This was also important for mapping our research. So what would a structure look like that would even allow us to hold this? We have the case study structure, we have the resources structures. How can they mesh together to become interconnected and to present a nonlinear approach that is also reflective of how Joan works and her artistic vocabulary, how she moves through different layers of time, stories, and networks she activates in her work. Accessibility, to choose the digital framework that allows for the highest accessibility. This is Deena is going to speak about that. And to really also make a site that's sustainable and that doesn't rely on too many fancy gadgets, but that will really be around and that can be shared. And also the conservation. So we don't only just document what we find, but we also documented our approach, our way of working to ensure the preservation of the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base. And this is, of course, together with Fales Library, but also to really see how do we work. So there's also tutorial videos that are on the site to really show people how can they do this themselves. And I think this is really where the genuine push comes from the technological team that will offer many perspectives that go way beyond just the WordPress site. That's like a portal that then spreads out into the universe of a wiki, which of course Deena will speak about. And in the end, it's impact, to think about what kind of impact do we want? What kind of impact will this have on the work, on Joan's research herself, or on the research that other curators, conservators, and artists will have looking at this work. I will now speak about the two case studies. So there were Organic Honey and there's Mirage, and I will start with Organic Honey. It's one of her key performances of Jonas's work. It was first performed in 1972 as Organic Honey Visuals Telepathy, and it included also in its version Organic Honey's vertical roll, a closed circuit camera, monitors, as well as projections that Jonas used to create new situational experiences, enabling audiences to view different aspects of the work simultaneously. This composition of spaces by layering drawings, videos, and still images was held together by the artist's presence and her carefully choreographed gestures. So one of the first things we did was draw up this map. And this is a visualization map that was drawn by Brendan Eng in 2017 and completed by Tracy Robinson in 2020. And this map was really vital to understand the various iterations and complexities of the artworks and the case studies. And here are many of the photographs. We were so generously supported by a lot of the photographers' archives, not just by Joan, because we really sought copyright permission for these to be available. And many of the photographers also generously gave us photographic material that was never before published or seen, a lot of contact sheets, yes, just a lot of different perspectives on the work and its various versions. And here I'm flipping through a few. In the research sections of the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base, we also gathered a section where you can just go through by photographers, not only just by case studies. We also were given access generously to Jonas's notebooks in her studio, where we were able to really look at them and to scan them and to make them also available on the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base. And we, of course, thought about what happens afterwards when these works become installations. When Jonas, for example, in 1994, for her exhibition at the Steadloop, developed the installations that Organic Honey is now in, but also for works like Mirage. So there's also an overview map for Mirage on the site. Each case study work was treated very equally, which was very important for us. And Mirage was first presented in 1976 as a performance at New York's Anthology Film Archive, where Jonas used film, video, drawing, and props to evoke new rituals and forms of movement and transformation between the stage, in this case, and the screen. The exhibition space, of course, always being very important in this. Both works included performance and various media. And they're not only significant for the way the moving image is placed in dialogue with live action, but also altering the viewer's experience, but for their overall iterative quality, which gives emphasis on temporality, repetition, and ephemerality. So here are some of the instances it was performed. Mirage was performed about 6 times from 1976 to 1983. And in 2018, Joan Jonas re-performed this work, slightly adapted for Tate Modern. This was a series curated by Catherine Wood in conjunction with the exhibition, of course, at Tate that Andrea Lissoni curated. And there were also various installation versions. There was one Mirage version that was curated by Chrissy Isles showed at the Whitney Museum in the early 2000s. And there's also, of course, the version of Mirage that is now part of MoMA's collection. And so we were very fortunate that MoMA really allowed us to have the plans of the installation, the conservation reports, and to really understand the work in its many in its very different elements that are really part of it. So this led us, these 2 exhibition case studies really led us to think about the exhibitions that they are part of. When were they shown? How were they developed? What happened in the exhibition? And we chose 3 particular exhibitions, even though the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base also has other exhibition case studies. I just want to mention here very briefly also the show that Valerie Smith curated at the Queen's Museum in 2002, which was the first retrospective of Joan's work in the US, and until now at DIA, by the show curated by Kelly Kidlin, was really one of the only instances where Jonas's work got this attention. And now, of course, there's other shows coming up. But it was important for us to really look at how Jonas's works are exhibited and presented as multimedia installations and how they become really part of a collection. So the first exhibition that we thought about, and we were in touch with Berkeley and also interviewed David Ross and of course Joan, was Organic Honey's, was the exhibition Joan Jonas Performance Video and Installations. There's so many titles in this project. Sometimes it gets a little confusing. Sorry. This was at the University of Art Museum, the UC Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. And it was interesting because here they were really very early first tries of installations that would take foot, even though there had been earlier pieces like Stage Sets, which is now a DIA from 76. But it was interesting here because they were really like performative environments that took place. So we have floor plans, performance schedules. It was only one of the few times I think Joan performed near her installations. Normally she does not perform in her installations, which is very important for us to track these little details and to really record them and to talk about them and to present those conversations in the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base, to really understand the precision and at the same time the openness Jonas has always developed in her work. The second case study is her first European retrospective in 1994 at the Steadloop Museum in Amsterdam, which was curated by Doreen Mignon, and where Joan really developed installations of her works. This was always also a moment where and here we have the floor plans that were at that time faxed back and forth. And again, the Steadloop Museum archives, they really generously offered us all their files. There's a 80-page condition report that we have of Organic Honey, for example, and really tracking down how these works have been presented over the years, but of course with a specific focus in this case on Organic Honey's visual telepathy. So here's a more recent installation from 2012, curated by Ann Goldstein. And last and thirdly, the installation Lighttime Tales at the Fondazione Pirelli Hangar Bicocca, curated by Andrea Lissoni, which was specifically interesting because while her installations often occupy single spaces, Jonas' retrospective in Milan took place in a giant airplane hangar, and this allowed visitors to move through a kind of landscape of installations. There were no walls, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in the conversation that follows. So these questions of the overflow of sound, for example, were extremely important. These exhibitions really allowed us to understand the interconnectedness of the iterations and the transitional moments Oh, and here also is the floor plan, for example, from Milan. And we conducted really very intense interviews with the entire team, which was quite impressive to understand this exhibition and the complexity of it. So all these different exhibition case studies, backs again, really allowed us to understand the interconnectedness. In other words, and it became also important for us when we realized in the process how much attention we had to give to these moments before and after the event, but also what happens when an artwork, when it becomes part of a collection. In other words, enters the museum, has a new life. And how does this focus enable us to document by using the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base as a kind of base to gather this material, to really look at the practice and the methodology that Jonas developed, and that is so deeply embedded in the curatorial and institutional choices and reception that has defined these works. So if you think about time, and I'm going to finish, this is the last thought, in that respect, the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base is really dedicated to take note, to capture, to pin down, and yet at the same time, and I really fully embrace that contradictory notion here, to keep journalists' work moving, to keep the work in a contingent state of experience when we look at it, when we think about it. And this means revealing the various layers of work, looking closely at this interconnectedness, translating performance to the site of the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base have the aim to maintain and to highlight this contingent nature of the work, which, just like the performance itself, evolves over time into the present. And with that, I want to finish and really just quickly throw up some slides of the research team that was there, the assistant curatorial director, assistant linked data researchers, all the students from NYU and also from UQAM in Montreal that participated. Also, of course, our project advisors, and the research support we got from all these different institutions, and the financial support, support that we got. I'm going to stop sharing now. And so I want to thank you for your attention. And with that, I think we're going to see Deena's contribution to this event today. And I will see you later for the conversation.
My name is Deena Engel. I am sorry that I cannot attend today in person, but I am delighted to present the technology side of the project alongside my colleague, Lozana Rossenova, who co-wrote the slides and will be available to answer questions. So we now turn to the D in digital humanities, the technology aspect of this project. It became clear to us early on that the material we are working with does not fit neatly into a traditional hierarchical schema, such as an SQL database. Performance artworks consist of many components, including objects such as drawings, audio, video, and other media that need to be linked together. Performance art happens over time as new iterations need to be linked together. And performance art may involve collaboration among artists and working with more than one institution whose data also need to be linked together. Competing to make meaning out of the world, database and narrative produce endless hybrids. It is hard to find a pure encyclopedia without any traces of narrative in it, and vice versa. On the continuum of narrative and data, we find that there is a great deal to write about Joan Jonas and her work, the so-called narrative. And there are also many disparate facts and specific data points that we wish to track, such as which works were exhibited, where, and when. One of our goals has been to consider how we wish to exploit the best of both worlds, to offer our readers the narrative component, so important to art historical, curatorial, and conservation research, but without losing sight of the data specifics that allow us to track this artist's works. So we decided on a series of project goals for the technology side of the project. First, to build a narrative that captures our art historical, curatorial, and conservation research on Joan Jonas's works in a readable essay format that includes media such as images, video, audio recordings of interviews, and other supporting materials. Second, to build out a data set that captures both the facts about and the connections among the artist's works and exhibitions, as well as the individuals and institutions that she collaborated with. Third, to share our resource and make the results of our research discoverable across institutional boundaries and across cultural and national boundaries. Fourth, to document our approach so that other small arts organizations, such as artist foundations and small collections, can use this project as a model and contribute to research on contemporary art. And fifth, we wish to ensure the long-term preservation of this resource, and that has been an important goal throughout this project, impacting all of our technology decisions. So in order to accomplish these project goals, we next needed to determine our systems goals and make systems decisions. First, we made a commitment to use open source software both to save on cost and as an expression of commitment to open source software and to making cultural heritage research accessible to all. We selected WordPress as an open source, widely used, and widely supported content management system to host the narrative results of our work. We elected to use linked open data for our data set in order to capture the relationships among the entities in the data and the facts represented by the data. We further decided to use Wikidata to host our linked open data set in order to support cross-institutional and international discoverability for research purposes. Lozana has collaborated with colleagues who built an OpenRefine tool for preparing and uploading data into Wikidata. OpenRefine is an open source, popular data preparation tool which is widely used in digital humanities in general and in the fine arts in particular. And finally, by using Wikidata, we invite the use of Sparkle, a query language for working with linked open data. We are integrating sample Sparkle queries at the Wikidata Sparkle endpoint into our resource in order to guide users to explore the dataset. And we also seek to provide suggestions and resources for users who wish to build their own Sparkle queries to research Joan Jonas's works or works in their own collections. The WordPress portal hosts the essays, documentation, and other written materials, along with images, audio recordings of interviews with text transcripts, bibliographies, and more. So what are linked data? One can think of linked data as subject, predicate, object, thinking in language terms. For example, Joan Jonas, the subject, of our statement, is represented by, that would be the predicate, EAI, the object of this statement. We can follow this with statements such as, Joan Jonas is the subject, is identified in the MoMA database, that's our predicate, with artist ID 2930, our object. Or Joan Jonas, subject, is collected by, that's our predicate, MoMA, and that would be the object. We can further expand these statements and follow them, for example, by looking at MoMA. MoMA, a subject, is an instance of, that's a predicate, a museum, and that's the object. And from here, we can connect to other information about MoMA. In order to work in Wikidata, as you can see, correctly and consistently identifying the predicates of the above statements will allow us to share data and to prepare for discoverability across borders and across institutions. Here we have been fortunate to work with Lozana, who is a specialist in the field. It is important that the predicates are used by scholars similarly by scholars in different places, in other words, so that we can share data without mixing apples with oranges. It is also important to bear in mind to collaborate with colleagues in your field or in the field who are active in establishing, documenting, and standardizing commonly recognized properties and terminology, in our case, related to performance art. And finally, what is Sparkle? Sparkle is both a protocol and a language designed to retrieve and manipulate data stored in the Resource Description Framework, RDF format, the so-called triplets that you heard about above, with our example using subject, predicate, object structure statements. We are using the Sparkle query language to ask questions of the data and to render data visualizations based on our research. Wikidata offers an endpoint, which is a graphical user interface that allows us to query the data in real time, and it facilitates writing out the code for each query. Sparkle is really not as bad as it looks, and here you can see a sample Sparkle query and a partial result. As the team of scholars continued to add data into Wikidata about Joan Jonas's work, the resulting data tables and data visualizations have become more complex, more robust, and will hopefully lead to new and interesting ways to study this artist's exciting works. We are presenting linked open data as a tool for studying contemporary performance art and Joan Jonas's works in particular. We encourage scholars in many areas of contemporary art and visual arts in general to learn these tools and work with them to explore and study visual works in your own fields. As part of the chapter on linked open data, you will find many examples of data visualizations using linked open data so that you can explore the artist's works and contextualize and literally see the data about these works in new and exciting ways. Some of the ways the data are presented include a dimensions value visualization, which highlights relationships between discrete instantiations of the works in our data set. You will also find a timeline visualization, which contextualizes the temporal dimensions of events and performances, as well as an interactive map visualization, which locates venues. Other types of data visualizations presented here include bar charts, bubble charts, tree maps, and graphs. To be able to visualize and make meaning out of our data set, it is very important to source, select, and model data in particular ways which enable complex relations to be drawn. In the linked open data chapter, we therefore also provide general resources to help researchers and GLAM professionals get started with the preparation and uploading of their data into Wikidata. We provide practical tips and guides to how we used tools like OpenRefine. It is also possible to get an overview of the entirety of our data model, in other words, the types of data and the relations among data that we worked with in the JJKB, with this overview diagram that Lozana prepared and is available in the linked open data chapter. Finally, we provide a range of tutorials in this chapter. Our tutorials offer step-by-step instructions, detailed screenshots, and a video to help you get started writing queries of your own. We hope you will enjoy exploring the linked open data chapter and the rest of the numerous resources available in the JJKB. We wish to thank our research team, to our project advisors, research support, and the generous financial support that we have received to pursue this project. Thank you for joining us today.
We are recording now, or you have to push the button on the camera?
That's okay. We'll go back the way you did that. I should be closer to it. This is stationary. But now, this is stationary. In other words, the vertical roll goes on and off all through this whole part.
Thank you so much for showing that footage. I now invite Andrea Lissoni, Rebecca Cleman, and Joan Jonas to join me.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Where's Andrea?
I think he's coming in just a second. So what we just saw was unedited footage. This is really documentary. Hi, Andrea. Hello. So what you just need to unmute yourself. There you go. I'm just going to start out by saying thank you for allowing us to show this excerpt of unedited footage that's called Organic Honey Reel 3 from 1973. It's part of materials that Joan and you later used to include with Organic Honey's vertical roll. It was shot during a rehearsal at Leo Castelli Galleries, and it's really from your personal archive. And it really shows very well also how you direct the camera, which was operated by Joyce Nareau, and you can also see photographs, of course, by Babette Mangold. I want to start out by Rebecca and I spoke about showing this footage, and Rebecca proposed and said this could be great because it's already on the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base, like other unedited footage and many other documents. And I was very excited about that together because I also thought that in this conversation with you, Andrea, and Rebecca, and of course you, Joan, the conversation you're going to have, it's such a great starting point to maybe talk about a bit of what happened in this video. How do you work with space? How do you work with moving image? And Rebecca and Andrea and Joan, you were already introduced by Kelly, so I don't want to repeat that. I think we can just go ahead if that's okay. But I do want to say that Rebecca and Laurie Zupai, who I think is with us somewhere out there today, I've been working with Joan, of course, for many, many years. And Andrea has also worked with Joan for quite a few years now, curating and working from a curatorial perspective with her exhibitions. And thank you again, Joan, for being here today, talking to us, and to all of you here present, obviously, at this panel, for allowing us to interview you and the teams that are involved with the work and all the different aspects. But let's start. Perhaps I'm going to pass the word over to you, Joan, to tell us a little bit. What did we just see? And perhaps
I was wondering myself, actually. I haven't looked at it for a while, but anyway, we recorded Joyce Nareau, who the first video distribution situation was Castelli-Sonnabend tapes and films, and that was run by Joyce Nareau, and then later EAI began, and that whole archive was given to EAI, actually, of the Castelli-Sonnabend. But anyway, so when I performed at Castelli, Joyce was running the situation, and we decided that she would record the rehearsals and all the, we rehearsed for hours, and she recorded quite a bit of that rehearsal. In this case, but that was the playing, I have to say, the camera one. I always directed the camera in all of my work. The camera is, my device as well. Although when I'm performing in that situation, I could not hold the camera and record what I wanted Babette to record or to reflect. And Joyce was simply doing a recording of the rehearsal. So it's much longer. That what you saw was never in a performance. I mean, that part where I'm standing with the mirror and looking, that's much, it's very, very short. So it's interesting that it just went on and on. That's what happens. And it's sort of interesting to look back on a situation like that when it's depicted in that way. It's a totally different way from which it finally emerged as part of that performance.
Yeah, thank you for that great insight. And I think it also leads really nicely to perhaps Rebecca. Perhaps you can say a little bit before we go into the other types of spaces, perhaps very briefly just speak about EAI's long relationship with Joan, and of course also with under Laurie's directorship and now under your directorship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I also just have to say that the way that you were presenting the JJKB as supporting Joan's work as, dealing so much in the contingent and the iterative and the multimedia aspect of that is so crucial. And, just quickly, EAI was founded in 1971 by a visionary gallerist and kind of eccentric and important figure, Howard Wise, who was very excited about video, which was emergent. I think that maybe, Joan, you got your first camera, Sony Portapak camera, around 1970. So it was these cameras were just available to artists for the first time in the late 60s. And Howard was one of many figures who got very excited about what artists were doing, specifically about his hope was that it would involve television a little bit more. And I think by the mid 70s on into the 80s, it became clear that TV wasn't the next free and open cultural platform that the video subculture hoped it would be. And it was really going to be the art institutions that supported this kind of work. Laurie Zapay, hello, Laurie, if you're watching, began working at EAI under Howard in 1981. And it was, I think, as early as the mid 1980s that Laurie understood that there was a need for EAI to take on a preservation program devoted to work such as Joan's early video work. And I just have to say that at this moment, right now, I think there's no debate or question about the value of this work. But at the time, that wasn't the case. And I think that there was thinking, we just saw work that it was raw footage to a certain extent, but a lot of what you saw visually in terms of the low resolution, the kind of jumpiness of it, some of the sound qualities were just inherent in early video. And if you're coming from the perspective of art needing to be a kind of finish fetish approach, and the image quality should be, perfect, and it should be marketable and sold and presented in a certain way, then looking at work like this, there was going to be a big question mark about its value. And it also kind of is work that resisted being institutionalized, I think in part because it was so interdisciplinary and open. And Joan has described video as being like water, which I think is just absolutely beautiful. It's an inherently iterative and transformative and resistant medium, I think, for an artist to work in. But what you just saw was something that was very unique to Joan, this kind of taking advantage of the mirroring capabilities of video. I know that Joan is also very interested in working in film, but what video lent, of course, was this immediacy. So I just have to also give a little very large, actually, prop to Laurie for establishing the preservation program at EAI as early as the mid 80s, at the very moment when a lot of arts funding was cut as well. And so there was a real danger to this work. And even the Castelli Sonobend tape and video project, which ended up folding in the early 90s and then being absorbed by EAI and VDB in Chicago, was kind of starting to see the end of its utopic vision earlier in the 70s. So EAI has had a very long history with Joan's work and has done many projects. But I think, I just want to kind of emphasize that what we represent are the single channel video works, which are not editioned. They obviously are very distinct from Joan's installations, which I think developed later, but are, from the perspective of EAI as an organization, Joan is certainly one of many of the artists that we work with who really have furthered in her own way Howard Wise's vision for what artists were going to be able to do with video as a creative tool. And it's remarkable. And I just think that all of these aspects that you have drawn out through the JJKB are so perfect. And I think, I also just wanted to point anyone who's listening in now to 3 interviews that I've caught up with. I'm sure that there are others, but Lori Zippe gives a wonderful interview about EAI's history with Joan's work, and then her own experience as the executive director for many years. Seth Price gives a wonderful interview about working with Joan on Mirage and Mirage 2. And that was, it's wonderful to hear about what it was like for him when he was the technical director in the early aughts at EAI. And then I also enjoyed listening to Constance de Jong's perspective because, of course, as an artist herself, embracing the intermedia and the emergence of something that we maybe have come to know and recognize art historically that was just emergent in the downtown New York scene of the 70s. So, yeah, I think, have I spoken to EAI's?
Yes, and
I
also really want to add to this list, and obviously both you and Andrea are so, and Joan, of course, are so important to all the interviews we were able to do. And I'm thinking also of Stephen Vitello, who gave a really nice interview, and Andrea, the whole team at the Hangar Bicocca, incredible, and also Vicente Todoli, and also Catherine Wood, and people who saw the show like Anne Reynolds. So I think it really paints this larger picture, but I'm still very much interested also in talking specifically also in here, Andrea, I'm addressing you as somebody who has thought so much about the relationship of the moving image in relation to space. And then maybe, Joan, you can also speak about how you work with space. And of course, I can't, at one point, I'd love you all to address sound, because of course, in this raw footage, there's this horn in the background. But for now, I'd love to pass, so to say, the Zoom microphone to Andrea to maybe speak about how did you come to start working with Joan in these exhibitions, and what comes to your mind when you see this footage?
Thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon, everyone. So, it's an infinite question, but I guess one of the main principles that led the first thoughts about how an exhibition with Joan, on Joan, could take shape in a space that was pitch dark, is still pitch dark, and has no walls, was trying to understand how the work of Joan moves from one piece to the other, one installation to the other, on the one hand, and what gets echoed from one piece to the other, if there echoes or not. And of course, also trying to break this distinction between something that gets into a monitor, and something that gets into gets eventually in a projection. So how to think about where the sources and what the sources materials are, and the formats, and what comes from where. Particularly, I would like to mention the fact that for the Hangar Bicocca exhibition, we had one terrible question, which was we didn't have any wall, and going to a terrible question to deal with, but also an incredible, wonderful opportunity. Therefore, like going through all images of previous in presentation of Joan's works, not having a background, not knowing what the background could have been for the work. And when the challenge came to select installation to be displayed, of course, the main question was, how do we orientate? How do we set? How do we make sure that a long space, which is an hangar, is rewarding for an audience that not only goes through an history and through a sequence of works, but also comes back. So we had to think about orientation, forms of encounter, but also the way back. Because actually this is a dead end. The venue is a dead end, and the dead end ended with a particular work that we wanted to be encountered as a sort of linchpin, which was Reanimation. So we consider somehow the linchpin, center of the exhibition, Reanimation, and this principle of considering a work somehow. The center, not the end, led so much thoughts about the display. And a second point I could raise is, of course, how do we deal with sound? And Barbara, you mentioned the question. I think we decided very simply to apply a curatorial principle, which was, given the entire work of Joan, in our opinion, or at least in the opinion of the team I've been working with, and Joan, has so much to do with echoing and mirroring. Let's use this prop, this device that was so fundamental for Joan. Why not, instead of fighting against sound, trying to leave sound free and echo, and sometimes overlap, and sometimes also disturb. And last point I will raise, we tried never to forget where we were and where the place is, where the space is situated. So somehow, like being in a pitch dark environment, but also remembering what is outside, what is north, south, and west. So therefore, being very much aware that on the east side of the building, there was a train rail, and therefore installing a work like shape the center field of things in a specific way, according to this ideal imaginary landscape outside beyond the walls, and so on and so forth. So I could continue for a long time, but actually these were three main display principles we wanted to deal with, and then come many other ones.
I can show images a little bit later, but first I'd love to hear you, Joan. So now we stretch from like, how do you work with space, but then also through all the things you've just heard.
First, I want to say, I should have said it before. Thank you so much, all of you who worked on this, and Barbara, for your amazing energy. And it's so nice to see Andrea and to see Rebecca in this discussion. First of all, I'll say that for all of my installations, I make a model. So a lot of my thinking about this piece, the Hangar Bikoko, was a huge show, a huge space, and a challenge, as Andrea has said, because of the having no walls. That was one of Vincente Todoli, who invited us, said, you have one stipulation, you cannot make any walls. And actually, so the way I prepared was to go and see the shows that were in that space before my show. And one of them was a Mike Kelly show. And, to see how multiple works could exist side by side. So one thing I did was separate, of course, the works. And as Andrea has mentioned, one of the interesting things that developed was to be able to see several pieces at the same time. So you could link the pieces and the pieces overlapped. And you saw one projection, because I reuse and not particularly, but slightly. And so you see the relationship in that process. And Andrea, I didn't know about the outdoor consideration, but anyway. So I'll say also in relation to the sound, it was the one thing I was very nervous about, but we have to also give credit to Matthias, the chief curator or the chief installer, because I remember we left the night before the opening and we left Matthias there and he fixed it's just somebody who's very experienced. The way we dealt with it, the way I remember it is the sound was turned down. You could hear the sound in each piece and we didn't want it to overlap because it would be cacophony if it did. And so it was turned way down, and in that way it worked in that situation. And it's a way, I've just dealt with that same situation at Dia Beacon, which is a big room with a couple of pieces and the sound echoing all over the place. In the Hangar Bikoko, there was a big velvet curtain, so that muffled the sound a little bit, quite a bit actually, so we were lucky. I made a model of that piece, and it was the first, the Shape, the Scent, and the Feel of Things, which is at Dia Beacon, was first shown as an installation at Yvonne Lambert in New York City in a big, beautiful gallery space, a room. Then when it was shown at Hangar Bikoko, it was spread out and really partly configured to that flow. As Andrea said, how do you walk into the space and where are you led when you walk into a piece and you walk through it and then you go to another piece? So the Shape Descent was part of that flow situation concept. And some of the things that I did and we did there, I've brought to Dia Beacon. I don't know if that, I mean, I could go on also for a long time.
Why don't I keep on talking? Why don't I share the screen and just show a bit of the installation shots? Because I think this might help. I did show a few of the shots of, and of course there's many more images, and we rather quickly prepared these images today, but it might be nice just to see some of those shots, and please feel free to continue to speak. I think also there were some video elements in there, Rebecca, for this particular show that were important, because I think, Andrea, you really thought about how the videos will be presented in that space. So I'll just bounce it back to you, and I'll be the visual. I will show some images.
I just want to say also that Andrea asked me to do a new video for this show. And also he had decided to include, this is an example of a curator, how a curator might work in relation to my work. He decided to show a piece called Waltz, which is a 7-minute piece involving myself, my performing dog, and it's kind of a mythological type, based on dreams. And for me, that really kind of opened up something, because I wouldn't have chosen to show that. And so the new piece that I made, because Andrea invited me to make a new piece, was called Beautiful Dog, about my present dog. And Andrea loves animals and is very interested in how animals are depicted in artists' works. So you see how the works kind of link and flow in the space. I don't know. I came from art history. I really loved Renaissance painting and the space. How do you deal with space on a flat surface, and how is that depicted? So from the very beginning is depicted and created. So space for me is a medium, actually. And I begin with the space and how to fill it, how to alter it, how to arrange elements within that space. And so space, and also I include the idea of space in the flat monitor. That's another space. It's like a space in a box. That's when we all had monitors. And I thought of that as a space that's inside the box. And I did a piece based on, it's called Glass Puzzle. And it's the idea of the box itself, the glass surface. And then the use of the mirrors, altering space. The outdoor work is all about the space. How does space and distance alter the image? And so I love working on these installations for that reason. And then I have to add one more, and then I won't say anything for a while, but is the space of this knowledge base. That's another space. That is a complicated, virtual, very complicated space. And I think that's another space that we're entering into, right now.
That's really interesting. I think there's also a moment of accessibility, and I really wanted to maybe point back, just before we go back to Andrea, Rebecca, to the little showcase that we put together for this event, and also linking to the show, where now, of course, the accessibility of the amazing EAI archive and the collection of videos is, of course, also so key to our understanding these works from this time period up to today, of course, because the work EAI does is from today and tomorrow as well. And I think that's also something that's really, just gives so much information. And how do we process that, and how will that then come together? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the dream. That's the real dream. I think when I was speaking to the excitement around video and television, it was really about access, and it was really about distributing art broadly and getting it out of the museum, getting it out of that space, that rarefied space, making sure that it traveled in new ways and was freely accessible. And I think that was also something artists wanted to explore in that moment, was getting away from a kind of thinking about art that had sort of solidified and stagnated to a certain extent around forms that might still have been embraced and loved, painting and sculpture, but there was also an excitement about the moving image, and there was an excitement about these new tools. There was an excitement about looking to pop culture. Joan has spoken of the influence of Marilyn Monroe, for example, or of her early photo shoots, which is so incredible. So I think that access is one of the central concerns for EAI as an organization, and is also just what makes video so wonderful. It can be a really frustrating medium in some ways, just because it does allow for so much, so many iterations and so many versions. But I think Joan speaks to the beauty of what video can enable, which is, focusing on process and just being able to, again, have a very direct involvement in how one's image is framed and then represented in a public format, which I think is exciting. And just to give a nod to Andrea, and that, I don't know what the process would be like for Joan as an artist working with a curator like Andrea, but I would assume it's just a very generative one, because we've always appreciated working with Andrea, whether on this exhibition or other shows, because he's someone who embraces that aspect of an artist's work, their process, and this space where maybe they're able to sort of not know for sure how things are going to land or what they're doing, and wanting to be open to new possibilities. And I think that that's something that was clearly really embraced in the Hangar Bikoka exhibition. And it's just, even though it takes it away a little bit from EAI's particular focus on this idea of the single channel video, which doesn't have the same meaning that it might have had in the 70s. There's a direct continuum, obviously, in allowing an artist to just experiment freely in any way that they want to.
Can I say something quickly? I just want to say one thing about EAI. For all of us, video art, making video, I don't like the way video artist or performance artist terms, but for all of us working with video, EAI was a place that preserved our work, kept it, and distributed it. And we could not have done that ourselves. So it really, so important for that. Thank you, EAI.
It's mutual, totally mutual, Joan. We love doing what we do because of the artists we work with.
Yeah, do you want to speak a little bit about working with Joan about this process of working? And I think when we spoke with each other before, you spoke a little bit about the directionality of some of the pieces. I don't know, or whatever comes to your mind.
Sure. I think one point, I wonder whether you can share the screen again. The image can perhaps help.
Totally. Can you speak a little louder, Andrea? Tell me which image I should show.
Whatever you want. Any image, maybe that image from after the perspective from after Mirage. Not maybe this one, a previous one. This could be okay. I mean, also this could be okay. I guess what is interesting here is that the principle we were mentioning beforehand is very much at stake. If you look at this body of works and screens and props on the right side, at the very end of the image, you see perhaps a coyote standing on a pedestal, and you see a drawing hanging and a projection with colors, right? So the projection with colors is a component of the shape, the scent, and feel of things. And actually, it has a title, and the title is Wolf Lights. And that component that I actually saw for the first time when I was so privileged to install the shape, the scent, and feel of things with Joan, we took out as a single channel work, and we reinstalled as if it was a marquee on the public space outside the show at the Tate as a sort of invitation to enter. So the work, what you see a performer, Ragani has, performing on a backdrop of actual, let's call them Las Vegas lights, became a sort of introduction, a real marquee to an exhibition to be encountered in a public space. I'm mentioning this because I'm saying this is exactly why EAI is fundamental, but why it is important also to respect the nature of the work of Joan. That's the red projection I was mentioning. The nature of the work, meaning, for instance, I guess in this show, for the first time, we decided to project Song Delay, which is a major work of 1973, quite big, on a bigger size, on the right side or on the east side of the building. Why did we do this? Because we wanted, or I personally want, and I really need, and I wish this was happening forever, that the labor that an astonishing artist as Joan did, the amount of work that the group of people performed, and it was directed and then edited, takes the room, the space, and the importance that it deserves. So showing the work on a monitor, it would have been like transforming the work in a sort of documentation. The work was shot in film and holds the screen and needs to hold the screen. So that's why we made a little bit of an effort, and we move it into a projection, somehow respecting the size and the grain, but also for the sake of giving that kind of value to something that is performed by human beings in a huge space that recalls the space outside Hangar Bicocca, sort of dilapidated node zones or non-territory, that Joan embraced and took over in 1973 when she conceived this astonishing performance. Little example to also mention how did we work with space. So we had one dark, empty corner. We didn't have a big installation. We needed a work that could resonate and work as a sort of forking tune. And we decided to install as a sort of ideal perspective, like long perspective, song delay. And so on and so forth. Like I could mention many examples. Joan was mentioning digging out double lunar rabbits, a work that I know she doesn't necessarily consider a major work, that she shot in Japan in a very particular moment of her life and her career, that has the beautiful, quality of being conceived for curved space, for curved screens. It's always complicated to install this work because, of course, the curved screen never adapts to the projection, and the projection tends to spill. However, these curved screens not only demonstrate how Joan is keen on breaking the frame and has been keen on breaking the frame towards all her career, questioning the frames that are given by the industry, but also on how important it is for her, the bodily perception of the viewer. Someone she doesn't necessarily see when she performs because she's on a stage and she's blinded or she's in an open space, but someone who will be definitely encounter her work and encounter also the cone, the sculptural cone that a projection draws in the space. So again, a little example to share with you some reason why we decided to go for some works beside the wonderful model that Joan conceived, without which we wouldn't have been able to make the show, but sometimes to interact softly with the architecture, the construction of the architecture, but above all, the new possibility for a body, the body of a viewer, to encounter a work throughout that thing that we call brain, that is actually everywhere and not only in the head of us as animals. So again, I hope this allows Joan to say something or somehow answer your question, Barbara.
So I'm sorry, what question would I want to answer right now? It's just so overwhelming. You
can just take.
What?
You can just continue if you want.
Yeah. Well, I could talk about, maybe we should shift to Deer Beacon, and talk about the show that's there that you're going to see, Andrea, pretty soon. Because the Deer Beacon show is another installation of the shape, the set, the feel of things. And Deer Beacon, as you all know, is a beautiful space. It's in the basement of Deer Beacon. It's a beautiful space full of columns. This is from that show. And so what is there is, can we stay instead of flicking around? Like this is stage sets. And this was, again, thank goodness, Andrea's idea. I made stage sets in 1976, and it was shown at the ICA in Philadelphia. And it's an amalgam of installations of performance sets. I thought of my performance sets as stage sets, although I didn't make that too public. But I made this piece specifically called Stage Sets. And the chairs are from Organic Honey, based on an old accounting chair. The walls were part of a piece called Funnel, paper walls receding into a smaller space where the hoop, which is used in many places, is shown with bars hanging from the ceiling, going across the idea of the line and the circle, which runs through my work. And so it was Andrea's idea to show this work, which was, thank goodness, because I never would have brought this work out. So it's been resurrected and rebuilt twice, once at the Tate in London for the first 10 days of the exhibition, and now at Dia Beacon. And it's quite an extensive, the wonderful thing about the space at Dia Beacon is that I could expand, and the people who go there, you'll see that this work has been, there are other elements that you can't see in this image of a pagoda and a table with drawings. And so now we can flip through a little bit. So my idea about working at Dia Beacon, and Andrea mentioned this projection. I was lucky enough at Dia Beacon, Lynn Cook, who invited me to do this show. It was a delay in the opening of Dia, so I had a lot of time to prepare. So I went there when the factory was before they did any reservation, and I filmed these rooms in the basement with these columns, and then included it in the Shape, Descent, and Feel things, which was really at the time a site-specific work designed as a performance for these spaces. Let's see if we can see another image. And so one of the concepts I had when I was making this installation was, as you walk into the Dia Beacon space, you look down a long corridor and you see an image at the end, which a big projection. And that's what the audience in the performance saw. And then the rest of the piece is kind of at different angles on the sides and nestled in the columns. And then there are two cone pieces, which were also at the Hangar Bikoka, paper cones and tin cones, and stage sets. So there's three pieces, and the sound in that space is a terrible problem because it's extremely echoey, and you make a sound and it stays there for for 20 seconds or something like that. So again, we had to turn the volumes down. I'll just mention that because for me, it took away some of the sound, I have to say, so it's not perfect when you have a closed room and you can play the sound as loud as you want. But you turn the volumes down, and then the sounds come together. And so the sound in Mirage, there's barking and other sounds. Sometimes when the Shape, Descent, and Feel things, which Jason Moran's piano is playing, which is very dominant actually in the space, you hear the other sound come across that. And so it works in a funny way. And Jason Moran was the composer I worked with on this piece, and he's going to be there tomorrow. And we worked for 6 weeks in the Dia space on this performance. So you can see the rearrangement of the screens. Screens are a major, of course, for all people who project, they're a major part of the, shall we say, furniture, the design. So the screens have to be placed in certain positions in relation to each other. It is like I consider it three-dimensional sculpture, is the placement of the elements, which make, in relation to each other. It's very deliberately and carefully done. And then I worked with the lighting designer, Jan Krozer, who I've worked with before. And I thought of, when I saw, in this case, I thought pools of light. And so the space is amazing. So you have pools of light throughout the space that you see from a distance and you can walk into, and so on.
So we just have a few images right now, but Maybe we can talk a bit more about the sound as well. Maybe Joan, you just spoke about the difficulty of the sound at Dia Beacon, but maybe you can speak a bit more about that, Andrea, in relation to the exhibition in Milan or also at Tate.
Well, I think Joan said correctly that a exhibition like that can exist without a real collective brain, and therefore the contribution of that fantastic and very much missed head of production, Matteo De Vito, was fundamental in understanding that sound, although uneven or made of very different level and from different sources, voice, music, field recordings, and non-human sounds, needs to be attuned. And the question is working on a form of attunement, on a form of chorality that is not about fighting and going for high, but it's about starting from very low and understanding what does it mean to get closer work, and literally attune the whole exhibition and being attuned to the whole exhibition. So the point was really not trying to make the exhibition shouting, but to make the exhibition silently murmuring or whispering in some cases. Perhaps the most challenging work, which is Reanimation, because of the different sources, has been very cleverly, I guess, isolated. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, has been installed in a separate room at the end, but also at the center of the exhibition. On the one hand, we somehow prevented that work to trouble or to put trouble to other works, but also we enabled the audience to enjoy the presentation of the work itself. As I said, I would say there is no better work than attunement. We worked on trying to tune and to generate a sort of attunement between audiences, works, and the sound that we produce as audiences first. I guess considering the fact that the environment was so dramatically resonating and so dramatically complicated, the outcome was astonishing. In a following, let's say, iteration in Malmo, we could count on a different floor, on a wooden floor that really enabled to perhaps to pitch differently the sources, although the space was smaller. And this idea, Barbara, that you described very interesting about the work of Joan appearing for the first time all together without limits, without borders between one work and the other, became even more interesting in Malmo because the work were more squeezed and more close to each other. And from that, we learned at the Tate, where a sequence of rooms was given, and it was somehow important to think about a trajectory, a path, a sequence in encountering the works, and inevitably knowing Joan as someone who breaks frames, we were keen also to try as much as possible to break the edges between one room and the other. And we could do it only with the usual devices, with a screen, a projection being a center of gravity that calls you from one room to the other, or a sound claiming or calling again or attracting something that you're curious to see behind a column or behind a wall. And this is how we somehow compose. I would say, without having background in composition, I guess the only way to try to display the work of Joan in that is not that doesn't generate misunderstanding and misrepresentation of the work is really trying to compose and to contribute in this organic composition that is somehow what the work of Joan is also about. I have really no answer about the specific preoccupation of sound. I can say it's what I learned from Joan, the time she spent in working in space around her own works, in sitting, waiting, resting, and knowing that there's a moment when you have to enter and take this very short moment and take a decision. We try to apply it also to sound, like sitting, waiting, listening. So making the preparation of the show a sort of stage, a permanent stage, and then making this exercise of attunement at the very end.
I just want to say the first time that when I showed Organic Honey as an installation, Organic Honey has several different sound sources in it. There's vertical roll, there's the Organic Honey's visual telepathy. So different sound elements. And by the way, Barbara, that's not a horn in the background. It's a bull roarer. I don't know if any of you know what a bull roarer is. It's a device, I think, by indigenous people. And it's a piece of wood on the end of a string. And you go like this, and the wood spins and makes that sound. It's a whirring sound. Anyway, that's what that is that you heard before. But I'll also say that when I first showed the Organic Honey piece, I had 4 or 5 different sound sources, but I played them all together because at that time, they were all sounds that I made, and they were all tapping, clicking, rhythmic, and they all went together. But when I work with Jason, you cannot play his different soundtracks together. It sounds terrible. So the soundtrack, just to cut to the chase, for the shape, the scent, the feel things, is just the performance soundtrack. So there's a projection, there's a video record of the performance that was shot at Dia Beacon. And that soundtrack plays. We have the other element are speakers. Where do you put the speakers and what? Of course, I now rely on the technicians, because I don't involve myself in that. But the technicians know about, which speakers can we use and where should they be placed. And it's very important, all those decisions. So in Dia Beacon, you hear that soundtrack, hopefully not too loudly as you come in. But then as you get down closer to the piece, you hear it more clearly. But that is the soundtrack for that piece. And each of the videos have their own soundtrack, but we don't play them. We turn them off.
We also have a Q&A, and there was an interesting question that came in. We'll have some more questions a little later maybe, but there was one question that, thank you, Peter Ballast brought in. He asked, I'm interested to hear any thoughts, feelings, Joan, that you might have about being back at Dia again with Jason Moran all those years after the original 2005 collaboration and your journey together collaborating. How has that been for you, Joan, to be back I don't think it's the identical same space, but I was wondering if you could speak.
Well, it's a very similar, it's like next door. It's almost identical. I'll say I'm thrilled. It's just like magical that we can install the piece that was performed there in the space and that it's part of their collection. To me, it's wonderful. Jason I haven't seen him yet. I'll see him tomorrow. But it's been a pure pleasure to work there and to be in that space. So familiar, and yet, to use it differently a little bit. So to whoever asked that question, it's been, I can only say, wonderful. And I feel so lucky to be in this situation.
I don't know, Rebecca or Andrea, do you want to say something else before we ask more questions? Maybe.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
And tomorrow, Jose Blondet is coming from California. He played Abby Warburg in the performance, and Kate Fenner's. Jason is going to play at 12 and at 2, and Kate Fenner is going to sing once during the day. I added another projection to the installation. It's called the Salton Sea. I always wanted to put it in, but it's a video of a ruin, a modernist ruin, and the ironic juxtaposition of Pastures of Plenty against this modernist American ruin was very important for me as being part of the content of the piece. So because of the enlarged space that we have there at Dia, now I could add that and also give the piece a lot more space. So I haven't seen Jason yet, but also I'm sure it's going to be great for him to and he's giving out, he made a CD of all the music that he did while we were together, that we worked on together. and they're giving those out. So those will be available. Anyway, just.
Yeah. I think what might be also interesting, there was 2 questions that came in. And please, Andrea and Rebecca, interrupt if you have another comment or a question to make. Coming near, we have about 10 minutes to go. There was the question, so Jack Wigman asked this question, Joan. He says, Joan, thanks for joining this call. Did you have any apprehension posting your oeuvre to an online audience? Did you have, and there was a similar question about the documentation process in your work, but perhaps did you have any apprehension letting us into your studio, so to say, or what was your thoughts about that generosity? And I remember you've always been very generous with giving access to your work, but I was wondering about that.
Well, I'll just say, I'll try to answer quickly. I do have apprehension, yes. And I think when I was in the early 70s, late 60s, I wouldn't have done it. You know, I was very private about it. And the footage it showed, I never would have allowed that to be shown. You know, it's just, it's somebody's camera work who's not a camera person. I would never allow that out. But it's interesting as a document. And I think, Barbara, you were the one that brought those pieces out and showed them the unedited footage in the show. And was it Montreal?
Yeah, it was in Vienna. It was a show where we went into your archive and we shot all of the documentation you have of organic honey. And it was really, well, all the photos you see now on the JJKB. And you said, and it was interesting, as you were like, let's not show the final videos that are for distribution, but let's show the reels of what is really part of the archives. There were also notebooks, drawings, photographs. And that was really a beginning of thinking about that idea of, you know, we have 1 or 2 photographs of a performance, art historians write about it, but there's behind every image as, and now I'm going to bring up, of course, also Douglas Crimp, who is on our mind. There's always another image. We always have to think of all the images behind. And of course, he's very present also in this conversation.
I mean, we miss Douglas. And Douglas was a great friend and a great writer and visionary. But I just want to say that you mentioned Seth Price. You have an interview with Seth. And Seth was at EAI for a number of years. And he knew the archives. Of course, he looked at everything. And so that's another example of Seth saying, why don't you show this? And I would always say, oh, I don't want to show that. I mean, I'm so embarrassed. But Seth and Kurt, and so I'm so glad, you know, that somebody from the outside, okay, let's bring this out. And it's interesting. It's so weird, you know, or something like that. I'll just say that.
Yeah, that's what I love about that particular insight from Seth's reflections on his time, which of course, you know, this was before you could just readily digitize tapes and kind of scroll through the material quickly. I think he had a big box of tapes that you dropped off, Joan, and his job was just to go through them all. And he said some of the tapes actually were just like you had left your camera on and went out for dinner. And it was just the recording of like your wall or something for a while. And it was Seth's job to scrub through all that material. And then he was particularly interested in your off-air recordings of television content, which you might not have gravitated towards, but he was especially interested in that. Yeah, it's really great to hear about.
And I think that also comes in when we tried at the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base also to really interview artists, you know, and that's where Constance de Jong and Seth, of course, and others, Paula Langendijk, like many different artists' perspective came in who were, full disclosure, we could have interviewed a gazillion more people, but we really kept it very, very concentrated around organic honey and around Mirage and focused on these 3 exhibitions. So I know there's probably a long list of people who are compiling and saying, but why isn't this person here? Well, you know, we hope one day that we can make the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base grow. There was a question by somebody who's asking, Joan, what have you learned about the practice of documentation throughout this whole process through the last 50 years, so to say? What does documentation do?
I'll just say quickly, when I documented my work in the late 60s and early 70s, I would look at the document and be very uncomfortable because it wasn't the piece that I had experienced. It didn't smell right. The sound was not right, you know. So for a while in there, I didn't want to show any of that documentation. but more and more over the years, documenting became more and more important. So now we edit all we document all the performances, and we carefully edit them so that they're finished work in themselves. So the performance itself can be shown not as the same kind of work of art as like a single channel video or an installation, but as a document. And so it's become more and more important to me to work with that form.
Just very quickly, Lozana, thank you, Joan, for responding to that. Lozana Rossenova, who was so important in the technological developments that the Joan Jonas Base developed, is asking, please feel free to drop off a question in the Q&A if you have any question about the artist archive as a whole, or to Glenn, or to any in general, or also really to the technological side. Feel free to do that. But also, I just want to say, because sometimes it's a bit odd when we're many people in a space where we don't really see each other. Feel free, if you have questions, to of course also get in touch with the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base directly to ask these questions. Yeah, I think I have one more, and that might be interesting, because I think actually in the Milan exhibition, the rule was broken, and that is that, Joan, you say that you do not perform in the exhibitions, in the spaces where you exhibit work. And if I remember correctly, you did. I think, wasn't there a part of the animation?
No. We cleared one end and performed in one end of the enormous space. And I'll just say, I never perform in these installations. Mm-hmm. I perform in my own setups and stage sets, but not when I make an installation. I do not go back in and perform in it ever, because it's set up in a certain way. It's not for a performance. And Andrea, didn't we cleared out and we did the performance in one end of that big space, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There was a stage built, higher stage, and chairs were set, and an enormous corridor. Actually, the corridor of the exhibition became the environment where people could sit and see you performing. It wasn't possible to have a traditional theater situation, but the exhibition behind was somehow forgotten and was also shut out. So it was clearly a performative environment, although we hoped and we imagined audiences coming back to visit the exhibition. So it was a very special setting. I should also say, perhaps it's one of the performances you had with more audiences. There were really about 1,000 people in that space. So it was quite astonishing. Also for the Jason, I guess, to be exposed to this extraordinary audience.
We could mention something. I could just mention sound in relation to a situation like that. One of the most important elements when there's that many people, and a lot of them are kind of far away, the sound is the most important to carry the piece to the audience. So Jason's music and the sound effects, very important.
Right. Well, do you guys have any more comments or questions? I think please feel free. If not, I think we're slowly going to slip into the thank you mode.
I saw Julia Scher's name a little while ago. I don't know if she asked a question.
No, but she had comments.
I just want to say hello, Julia, and miss you. We all miss you wherever you are. I worked with her at MIT, and I knew her anyway, but wonderful person and artist.
Right. Okay. Well, with that, I'll lead it back to Theodora and I think Kelly. But first, I really want to thank Joan, you, for your dedication to work with all of us at the team, and also Rebecca, of course, and Carl and Laurie for working with us at EAI to really partly also make the Joan Jonas Knowledge Base happen. And of course, Andrea, for your presence and collaboration, and for being here today, because I know in Europe it's a little later than here now. We're at the end of the day. And with that, I pass it to Theodora. Thank you so much. And Kelly.
Can I just say thank you so much to Dia and to Kelly, to Theodora. Just want to separately thank Dia Beacon for, it's been a marvelous experience, and great team, great everything.
Yeah, the folks at DIA are really great. Thank you, Kelly, so much for making this happen, and also Theodora for organizing this entire event.
I would say this was really very much Theodora, and thank you to all of you. Really, it's just great to be together. It's was many years in the making. I think we were trying to do this even a couple years ago. I'm just so thankful that it happened.
Yeah.
And for all of the work that has gone into all the people that have been a part of the knowledge base. It's an incredible thing for not only you, Joan, but for the field. And thank you to everyone that's on this call that has been involved, because I can see many of them are in the participants, and it's just great. It's a great resource for all of us. And
shout out to our entire team.
A big shout out to everyone. Joan, thanks so much. Andrea, I know it must be late wherever you are. Rebecca, it's great. And thanks, Barbara, for bringing us all together.
Yes.
Thank you to Glenn.
And go see the show. It's fantastic. We'll see it all onwards. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.